Welcome to our lecture or our talk on how to help people die. And another way to talk about that is how to help people grow spiritually till the end of life. I owe a lot of gratitude to all the people who have taught me what I've learned, and it's the patients and their families that have given me all these their insights in how they are growing and where they got stuck, and that's what I have to offer you today. So beginning, what is spirituality? We can just break down that word because it's just too long and ask, what is spirit? And spirit is who you are and the stuff inside of you and how it grows. And it grows very gradually in small steps, and the way to get to spirit is to say, what has struck you, what has touched you in the last week? And I'm going to tell you a couple things that were there for me. One thing that touched me is my husband played his own music for the first time in a band form, and he just became completely alive about it and was just so much more freely himself, and that really touched me. And another thing, which may be a lot smaller to you, was that a friend of mine, a colleague, and I were talking with a patient, and he was talking very softly, and she was next to him and I was over on the side, and she said, "Would you like me to move?" And it just felt so gracious that she was willing to give up her spot so that I could hear also. Just touched me. Now, those are my examples, and I'd like to ask you, what are your examples of what has touched you in the last week? So I would suggest you put this on pause and just be with that. So then the task for helping people is just really very simple. It's just a question of just connect. That's all it is. And so when you have found your spot in the way that you connect, then you connect with others. And I have another question for you, and that is, how do you connect with your really good friend? What do you share with them, and how are you with them? And I want you to also think about the last couple of weeks and who you connected with and how you've enjoyed them and how they've enjoyed you. And that's what you have to bring to these people. Not any other thing of having stuff to offer or things that you're checking about, but just connecting you to them. That's the task. And that Just Connect was brought by Steve Post. He was a really good psychoanalyst in St. Louis. So these are the ways that I think are good to connect, or what's occurred to me from other people is that needs to be a better connection with family and friends, a better connection with the one, the holy God, a better connection with hope, a better connection with a sense of self, and a better connection with meaning. So friends and family, the one, hope, self, and meaning. I'd like to touch on a couple of those things before I go into more examples. But one person, I'm going to talk about a sense of self. Lots of people with Alzheimer's, they don't connect with other people. And there was a woman who was always shuffling through these cards like credit cards. She would open up this small wallet and go through these credit cards and look at them. And that's what she would do all day long. And in the middle of that, she said, "That guy didn't show up." And I thought about it, and there was another chaplain who was supposed to come over the weekend. He didn't come. And I said, "Do you mean John? And do you mean that he didn't come?" And she goes, "Yeah." And then I said, "You're really in there, aren't you? You're there." and all you do is do these credit cards, but you're in there. And she said, she got me. And that taught me to always, well, sometimes be present to who's inside. And it doesn't matter what they can or can't say, or what their ability to express themselves on the outside is, they're there. And that sense of self, we need other people to relate to us so that we have a sense of self. And when we only see the outside of a person rather than the inside, we're not really being with them. We need to be with them on their inside. And so it's really good to keep being there. And that's with sense of self. And another one I want to talk about is a sense of meaning. Going back earlier and saying what touched you this time, what touched you about other people, that is a piece of when you go back last week and you go back the week before and you go back in your life, really, when you go back, and what are the really moments, big moments when you got touched. That is what develops meaning, way from when you're little all the way up to the now. And one time when I was talking with somebody in a hospital as a chaplain, just in a hospital, not people dying, I asked this person about her meaning, and she started naming a few of these things, and I got this image inside of me of a string of pearls. It just didn't come here, it came in here. And I just sat with it for a while and I listened, and then I said, kind of like a string of pearls. And she said, that's exactly what I was thinking. And so what happens sometimes when we're talking soul to soul is these images come up that are exuding, coming from them, and they come into us. But you have to be really careful not to presume and not to think about what your image is, but to see what comes into you from the other person. Lots of times those images won't happen, but every once in a while they do. What I want to say is, most of all, when you visit somebody and when you're with somebody, something wants to surface. And it's a lot like a ball with air in it that's in the water that just pops up. And something wants to surface. And that's what I attend to, is what wants to surface now. So I want to talk about 3 people to just give you examples, but every person is entirely different. Every person is unique. So these are examples, but in one sense, you just have to let them all go, because how you are with somebody and the you make things pop up, but more them than you being with them. Things come up, and it's important for us to try to catch them or be with them or attend to these. They're pretty big. So the first one I want to talk about is John. And he was like a head, not housekeeper, but keeper big time at some big place. And he was in his house, maybe it was an apartment, and he was sitting there, and there's his TV that was meant a lot to him was all a mess, and there was dust on it, and there was a couch, and there was stuff all over it. And I looked at him, and I said, and he talked about how it used to be important that things were very neat and clean. In fact, he gave me a little lecture about, you can't clean things with a dirty cloth. You've got to clean things with a clean cloth. And then I said, this is kind of not clean like that. And he just talked about giving up, and that he just felt like he was going to die, and so he was going to give up. And I don't remember what I said, but I do remember what I did. And I got a little spray bottle and a clean cloth, and I cleaned off his TV, and he couldn't get up from his chair, and I cleaned off his couch, and talked about having hope, and that he was going to live. He was going to keep living until that moment that he died. So a week and a half later, I went and visited him. He said, I knew you'd be here today. And he said, some friends of mine came over and had a big party for me. And he just was just alive. And it was like he had recovered his sense of hope. Another story I want to tell you that's a bit longer is Linda. And she was in a nursing home, and she was in her bed, and I think she couldn't get out of her bed at that point. Anyway, I met her, and she would just talk about her life, and I would listen, and I would talk about her life with her. I mean, I would listen to what she was talking about her life. You know, here she's in bed, she can't be in her home, she has all the little things in her home that she doesn't have anymore. And so I would listen, and I would say, so I would bring that up and say, oh, listen, oh God, all these things, oh God. And she would hear that, and she would feel more at peace. So eventually, what we did was she would listen to these things that she was saying, and then she said, I'll do the praying. So then she would say, so this and this, and so I'm praying, oh God, be with me where I am. And so she did the praying. Eventually, the people in the nursing home, the staff, the aides, and the housekeepers would come to her and just sit down and talk and tell her their problems. She was just that kind of person. She was just easy to be with. So eventually she would talk, and this was for a long time, that her son, who had an important job to him, wouldn't come and visit her, and it just bothered her so much. So she would pray about this, and then it would bother her so much, and she would pray about it. And then she slowly grew to accept that he wasn't going to come, that he was not going to be there, because it was like every week she would hope that he would somehow be there, and she grew to accept that and have some peace about it. Well, then, as it turned out, her son did show up once, and she was very pleased. But again, keep in mind that she's declining and declining and declining. And I felt very, very close to her. And then she slipped into unconsciousness. Some people call it a coma. And she slipped there, and it just felt like there was no reaching her at all. And it was a day, and then it was 2 days, and then it was a week that she was not there. And it just felt like she wasn't there. She wasn't available for me to talk with, and I didn't know what was going on, so I didn't know what to say. So I went to one of the housekeepers, and I said, what's going on? And she said, she feels really guilty about something that she did in her life. And I just was like, oh, why didn't she tell me that? But that was hers, and she didn't want to bring it up, and she just didn't want to share that. It was too much. It was too close to her, and it wasn't for me to share. So eventually she died, like after about a week, and I didn't get there for just before her passing. I got there afterward, and there she was. Her face was calm. Her face was beatific. I have never seen such beauty on anyone. It was just like it felt like she was filled with heaven. And I knew at that point that she had figured out that it was all okay, and that she was forgiven, and that she was beautiful. And another one I want to talk about is Mr. Roundbush. Mr. Roundbush was a very bright man, but he had Alzheimer's. He knew it. But all he could do was finish nursery rhymes. This is all he could do. So I would start, Mary had a little lamb, and she would say her fleece was white as snow. And then I would say everywhere that Mary went, and he would say the lamb was sure to go. And it was like just these silly little phrases. It just must have been the pentameter or the rhythm that had him remember these things, was all he could do. I have to tell you that others of my staff would go and visit him, and he would just feign sleeping. He just wouldn't talk to them at all. So I was with him, and one time he was doing that, and he just stopped, and I said, "Mr. Roundbush, I promise you, I know you are a very bright person, and I'm not going to forget it. And so we may talk like this, but I know you are you." So what's important about him is that his wife was busy taking care of the grandchildren, because I think the daughter was in the hospital or very, very sick, so she had to always care for the grandkids, so she wasn't there. And he had a son that he was very close to. The two of them had been very close, and he didn't come. So what happened was, in the middle of that, he also felt like God wasn't there. He believed in God. I don't believe in pushing what somebody doesn't. If somebody doesn't believe something, I don't introduce it. But he did believe in God, and he didn't feel like God was there either. And he had a really withered hand, and I said to him, I said, "It's not a question of whether God is here, but it's a question of whether you're open to God being there." And I said, "Open your hand and ask God to be with you." So he opened his hand just a little tiny bit, and then he said, "I feel it." And that was everything to me. Eventually, he was dying. His son had come. His wife was there. And in that last day, he died the next day, the last day, he looked at me and he turned to his wife and he said to her, "I love you." And the next day he died. When I listen to people, I listen to their images and their stories. And what I do is I help them connect with God, because most of the people I come in touch with believe in God. If they didn't, I would connect them with the oneness or the universe or the earth, but I would have what they would do, and I would connect them with something that was greater. So one time this woman, again, she had Alzheimer's, and she talked about the beauty of the spring tree, and we talked about the sapping rising and how wonderful and how beautiful that is. And she said, and I said to her, "You are God's tree." And she said, "Oh, that's so wonderful. I'm going to remember that forever." And then she said, "What did you say?" And for a moment she had that, and maybe it went inside. I don't know. I want to talk about praying, and this is for people who believe in God, and you can adjust that if you don't to the oneness. But Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who is by far the person that I have learned the most from in terms of how to help people die, because she helped people die so much. She's the one that wrote those stages that are often used in hospices as, what stage is this person at and are they progressing? And she said, forget about the stages. Just pay attention to where somebody's at. They could be here, they could be there, they could be there. And so at my hospice, they always ask, what stage are they at? And I always put, doesn't apply. But what she said was, use even what is wrong. She said, injury happens as a means for your growth. And remember, just ask for what you need, and it will be given to you. And trust. Sounds a lot like Jesus, doesn't it? But this is her experience of being with people who are dying. And I could tell you stories about that, but I want to move on. So I want to talk about another woman. All my stories about people who are on hospice and who are dying. And she was talking about her granddaughter. And she told the story of her granddaughter who had lost her only and favorite doll. And they searched the whole house looking for it, and it was nowhere. And this little girl had been taught by her family to revere the Virgin Mary. And that's who everybody prayed to. So here's this little girl going around, Mary, 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 Mary. And then all of a sudden she opened a closet and pointed up. And there, of course, was the doll. So, a week or 2 weeks later, I'm talking with this woman, and she's talking about how she's lost or she needs to feel comforted. And I said, okay, so how about you pray about that? And she said, okay. Mary, 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 Mary. And it was just so touching that she would use this prayer from this little girl as her way of communicating and asking for help. I have another story. These are all some of my favorite stories. I have another story. There's this fellow named Anthony Williams. You may know of him, but he believes that he gets these messages from God about health, and he's written all these books about watch out for this syndrome, and it's not identifiable. And then he talks about eat this and take that, and so you get better. And he talks about diet and how this diet will help cleanse whatever toxins are going on. And he has 5 books on all this. So he tells this story. So it was cold, and the water, whatever, he was at a lake or something, and the water was cold, and his dog had gone out and was swimming, and all of a sudden went down under. And he went out to catch the dog, to get the dog, because this was his dog. And the voice came, if you keep going, you will die. You've got to turn back. And he said, if I can't keep my dog, I'm not going to do your work. So he kept swimming out, and the voice said, down there. And he went down, and there was the dog right there, and he pulled the dog up, and the 2 of them got back to shore. What this means to me is that God cares about what we want, and God will change God's mind. God will change what's going to happen to suit where we are and to suit what we ask for. Really, really. So keep that in mind. When you pray, God pays attention and changes. We have this story from Jesus, if you remember the story of the wedding feast, and Mary says to Jesus, they've run out of wine, and Jesus says, it's not my time yet. And Mary must have said some other words, and then he said, do whatever, and then they say to the servants, do whatever he tells you. But this miracle happens because a human being, Mary, asked him, and he changed his timing, his mind, to suit the needs of what was going on. This is just so important to pay attention that what you need, that God bends and changes, not just God, but reality to fit what you need. So one of the things that I do when I'm with people that I've done over and over again, when people don't feel like God is there, is I have them do this practice, which is to imagine a little candle or a candle in their heart. And I said, now imagine the flame. And I said, feel that flame. And that is God's love. And so they sit and they focus on that. And then I say, now imagine that going out farther and farther and farther. Can you feel that? Yes. Keep going till it fills your whole body. And lots of times they can feel it. And then they feel God's presence totally within them. Somebody else who works on hospice says that your soul, that our bodies are this big and our soul is even bigger than our bodies. So we are there, and we ask the heavens to be with us. Now I want to tell you something else. The heavens are also there. Some people keep looking up at the ceiling in the same spot, and then I say to the family, what name have they mentioned lately? Oh, their mother, or oh, their sister, or their son. And I said, they've died, right? And they go, yes. And I said, they're there. You can't see them, I can't see them, but they are there. One time, a friend of mine who died was there, and I did see him, and a couple of other people behind him, but because he was there, I couldn't see who they were. And I could feel that they wanted to help this person. I had never met this person. I was just walking into being with her. And first of all, they helped me to be with her and not have some hesitancy, which I had and didn't realize it all this time. But they helped me just to be with her and not have that hesitancy. So, and then I could feel that they wanted to help her, and I didn't know what to do. So I thought about it, and I didn't want to freak her out. So I said, and I think anyway, I said, there are some people who want to love you. Would you be open to that? And she said, yes. And so I said, okay, here they are. And I think I put my hand a little bit over her head, and I could feel it coming to her. And it made me realize we need the heavens, but the heavens also need us to do their work. The heavens need us to help this happen. And in this time, I have found myself putting my hand over people, and I had never done that before, and I always thought that was a kind of hokey thing to do. But when I feel it, and I don't always do, it's not a practice, I put my hand over someone so that the heavens can come down and bring their grace to the person. So my friend Trish Curtis said this wonderful phrase that I have used over and over again. This is a time of unwanted grace. Now, we might think that this grace is for the person who's dying. That makes sense, of course, doesn't it? And we are so attentive when we want to be with them, and people are like just trying to pray and pray, or be and relate as though it's all for them. And I have come to feel that it's for all of the people who are there. It's for the whole family. It's for the friends. Because this person is moving on, but the other people are moving on too. Everybody's going to get changed. So it's not that we're all just helping somebody else. We are participating in the change that's happening, because our lives are going to be changed forever too. So that is really important to know. The other thing I want to say is that I've also come to realize that people are not going to die. That we think of dying as though this is going to be over with and done, and their soul moves on. And lots of times when people have this fear of dying, it's because they think that their soul's going to stop, and their body will stop, their heart will stop, their being on this earth will stop, but they are not going to stop. I had this exercise with this shaman who had this exercise of us imagining ourselves shedding anything that we were ready to shed. I mean, if you were ready to shed your shirt or your jacket, you could do that, but when I shed, I was like shed my muscles, and then I shed my bones, and all of a sudden I was crossing this river, and I was going on the other side, up like this far up, just myself, just a little tiny piece. Ball. It was a ball. And then and then she had us come back and be in ourselves. And I realized that she was preparing us for death, that she was giving this exercise of being able to let go and move on. It was helpful. There are glimpses that people have when they're going to die, glimpses of heaven. And some of them are little, and some of them are big, and some of them are kind of odd. So one of the women that I was with said, I've got an appointment with a doctor upstairs tomorrow. And there was no upstairs, it was all one floor. And I thought, okay. And then she died the next day. And another woman said, there's a choir practicing down the hall, and they are pretty good. And she heard the music from heaven. Another woman, this is pretty incredible, and it doesn't happen usually at all. This woman said, she was talking with me and she was very tired, and she said, when I close my eyes, I can see heaven. I see my unborn grandchild. She has curly black hair. And then she was so tired, she'd close her eyes and she'd be gone for a while, and then she'd come back up. And it was every time when she closed her eyes, she was in heaven. And she didn't die right away. She died like 5 days later, but she had these images of being in heaven before she died. So it must have comforted her greatly that all she needed to do when she was ready was to close her eyes for good, and that's where she would be. Another woman had a dream, and it wasn't a waking thing, it was a dream, and she said, I had a dream that there was going to be this great party, and she said, and I hadn't RSVP'd yet. And eventually, not that time, but when I went another time, I said, seems to me that you haven't, her conversation allowed me to say this. I didn't bring it up until it felt like she was ready, that she was thinking it but not touching it yet. And I said, seems to me that you haven't decided that it's okay that you're going to let go and die, or when you're going to do that. And she really felt like that, and it resonated with her, and she didn't decide right then and there that she would agree to die. That was up to her to figure out on her own. There are some things that Ira Byrok has said that need to get said before a person dies, and that is, please forgive me, I forgive you, thank you, and goodbye. Now, David Kessler, another very famous person who works with people that are dying, added this. He said, I'm grateful for, and then whatever it is that you're truly grateful for of this person, and I love you. And the other thing is to say, I'll be okay. Now, I would add a little bit to more both of these, and I would say to these people, you have brought heaven down to earth by living your life and living the way, the blessings that you gave. You have brought heaven down to earth. And the other thing that I think is really important to say is, you are doing a good job. People are there and they're trying to figure out how to let go, and they're holding on and they're not holding on, and it's a struggle, and nobody says to them, you're doing a really good job. You know, when we get ready for anything, it's a hit and miss thing. We're getting ready, we're not quite ready, we've got to fix that, we've got to fix this. When somebody's doing their final big work, they need to hear they're doing well, because they can lose that sense. And the other thing is that the more that they can be present in themselves, the better it is. So I'm going to talk about transitioning in the last 3 days. And transitioning is when all of a sudden they start breathing. And it's more shallow. There can be a little bit of rattle. You can get that with some drops. You can stop the rattling. But it's the last 3 days when they are unconscious. And I don't call it being in a coma, but most people do. You can be roused during that time. You can take their hand and rouse them. And some people just keep doing that, and making them be awake, be awake. But what they're really doing is they're taking that time and they're dreaming. They're dreamingly the same way as every night. Every night. It's not like we live without sleeping. Every night we process the day of what's happened. And can you imagine needing to process your entire life? You need to do a lot of below consciousness work. You need to process it. And that's what they're doing. And they're processing what they have been and who they have been and what resentments they have and what just all this stuff that can stop them up. And then they have to figure out if they want to let go of that or not let go of it. And all of that takes a lot of work, and it's best done, obviously, because that's the way it happens with most people, is it needs to be done in an unconscious way. Of course, there are some people who are alive and then, boom, they just go like that. But most people need to work in this unconscious realm to find their way and their way through things, and they get stuck at some places and then they let go. At least that's what it feels like to me. So there's a point where we call it transitioning, and that's like about the last 3 days of life. Now, it's not exactly 3 days. It can be 1 day. It can be 20 minutes. It's usually 3 days. It can be a week, but it's that transitioning period. People are breathing shallowly. They're breathing through their mouth. They can have a gargle, which can be taken care of by some drops, so you don't have to hear this, what's called a rattle. You don't have to hear that. It can be resolved in most cases. And what's most important is that they're out of pain. Now, to me, this is a chaplain speaking and not a nurse, there's an interesting balance between being out of pain and letting them be conscious, and they're unconscious enough to do the work that they need to do. You don't want to be super snowed because there's work to be done, and they do better. I would do better if I had my bearings and I could think about what I was doing, feel what I was doing, and not have this stuff messing me up. But what's most important is that they're out of pain. And that they are relaxed. Sometimes I have people play music. I usually have them play it on their phone so they can find the music that they like, that they're comfortable with. The music that they grew up as teenagers and 20-year-olds, or music that they and their spouse loved to dance to, or just music that they love. And what's also important is the presence of other people. And lots of times people tell stories of when they were, just all kinds of stories. Families get around, or friends, and they end up telling, oh, do you remember this? And then she did that, or oh, remember, and he did this. And all those stories just help that person, because there's all these people around, and then they can go down under, because these people are there holding the fort down. One time, and dogs and cats are really important. But I'll tell you one little story about a dog. There's a little dog, and dogs are supposed to, when you go see, they're supposed to be locked away so that don't bother anybody. Don't bother the people that are coming, because they could bite sometimes. Anyway, so this dog was in the laundry room, and I said, let the dog out. And the dog, and then he jumped up on the bed of the person that was dying, and then he sat right in front of her, and he was calm, like, I'm taking care of her, and I'm there first. So I met her. She was talking at the time, and met her, talked about her needs and stuff, and I said, so then she, some days later I went back because she was transitioning, and again, the dog was there, and I said, let the dog out, and the dog was sitting on her bed, and I said this thing of, okay, now you're transitioning, and this means that, and the dog was like, and I just stopped, and I was like, whoops, that's not okay, and I said, then her friend was there, and I said, would you talk about your days in high school? And she started talking, and the dog just calmed down, like, that's what needs to happen. And so dogs and cats can read a person's self below consciousness and use it, and help us to understand what's going on. Let's see. You've heard this before, and I want to say it again. A person can be roused, but you don't want to keep at them because they need to do their work. You just say, every once in a while, you can say, I'm with you, or I love you, and then let them do their work. And that hearing is the last thing to go. So I want to tell you about a person named Donna who was unconscious, and she was unconscious for like 3 days, and 3 days, so that's the marker, and probably she's going to die. And her daughter was there. She was talking about her mother, you didn't do this and you didn't do that, and after 3 days, Donna woke up, and she didn't say anything to me. She wasn't going to say anything to me, and I just said, okay, and I was with her. And then I went back 3 days later, and she said, God told me I had to come. Oh, I have to tell you that this woman, Donna, could not get out of bed. She could not move her muscles. She was just straight in bed. And she, in a just kind of abrupt way, said, God sent me back. He told me I needed to learn more about love. And she turned to her daughter, and she said, and I heard everything you said about me. And I thought it was very odd and interesting and humbling to realize that she was having to learn more about love, being in this nursing home, being so confined, and yet for 2 weeks she was learning more about love. I didn't see her after that. She died, and I wasn't there. So waiting for. I'm sure that you've heard about people waiting for somebody to show up who's coming from California or Chicago or whatever, and they're on the plane. And what I tell the families is, tell the person when they're going to be there. So-and-so is arriving in 2 hours. They're coming tomorrow morning. They'll be here in 20 minutes. Let the person know so that they can adjust the timing of when they're going to go. And I have one story about somebody who was on a plane, and they were on the plane, and they felt the person die at the exact time that the person died. But that's unusual. Usually the person really tries to wait until so-and-so shows up. I've got an interesting story about somebody showing up. So one time this person was transitioning. The nurse that was there was the nurse that's around. Some people just are always around when somebody dies, and this nurse was there, so I thought, oh, it's going to die when she's here. And So the phone rang, and the voice said, "Is Bill there?" And then the person hung up. And the family said, "Bill, that's this woman's son that died 3 years ago." And they checked the phone and they tried to call it back, and the phone didn't exist, the place it came from. And so Bill was just trying to say, not is Bill there, but Bill is here with those people. And that person died 5 minutes later. The nurse had left. We had to call the nurse back. So she missed it by 5 minutes. Another time, this woman was dying, and the daughter called and said, the car's not working. And so I was like, okay, what can we do? I couldn't go get her legally. Can't do that. I called and said, can we pay for a cab? Couldn't do that. And I just was like, this woman needs to be here. This daughter needs to be here. This person is dying and needs that. And so I got her on, I thought, oh, you can use the phone. So I got her on the phone. The person said, these last words, and the woman died 3 minutes later. And there was another one that is not exactly waiting, but it's one of those things that bubble up and need to happen. It's between that and it's not waiting, but it's timing. So this woman had Alzheimer's. She was no longer conscious. The daughter was like in the room, but moving around. And we just started talking, and she said, I've always had to tell my mother what to do. Get this done, and get that done, and do this and do that. And I said, you're the oldest. And she said, yep. And I said, were you closer to your father? And she said, yes, my father and I were close, and I was never close with my mother. And you could even tell by the distance in the room. And I remembered what she said about I've always had to tell her what to do and how to be there and stuff. And I said, you don't have to do that anymore. And she started moving closer to this person and then said, Mom. And they were closer in those last hours. It was really touching to me. Now, I want to tell you about two big mistakes that I made. So there was this gentleman. He didn't want to see a chaplain. Lots of people, not lots of people, but a fair amount, like 10%, whatever, don't want to see a chaplain. They don't want a chaplain for various reasons. Well, he had a very loving family, and they were very religious, and he didn't need a chaplain. He was very lucid, didn't have Alzheimer's. He was fully minded, and he started transition, but it was 1 day, and then it was 2 days, and then it was a week, and the staff was like, what's going on with this fellow? And all of a sudden, he told his family that he wanted to see the chaplain. And I was a little bit afraid. I was like, what could he want, and what was I going to do? And he was lucid, and he said, should it be that somebody asked you to come out of your body? And I said, is this person living? Is this person a living member of your family? And he said, yes. And I said, no, nobody should ask you to come out of your body. Your body is yourself. That's who you are. You don't have to do that. And then 3 days later, beyond that, he died. And I realized that what he thought was living was not living on this earth, but somebody said, come out of your body, let go. And I had told him the exact wrong thing, rather than, yes, you can let go. I had told him, no, you can stay in your body. And I felt terrible about the heavens asking him to come along, and me, as this little person on earth, saying, no, don't do that. I was entirely wrong. I've talked with one person who said, this is the important point where help is needed. And that is, nobody is taught how to die. We don't bring that up. We don't teach them how to die. What I've come up with in the short form is, when the time comes, you can shed your body like it's an old winter coat. Just let go of it and slip out of your body, often through your head. And I tap their head up there. It's the Kopabi, the place where the Hopis say the spirit enters the body in the first place. You can come out of your body and take the hand of the one who's there for you. Usually I ask, somebody there? Yes, take their hand and they will lead you home and it won't hurt. So I've come to ask permission, either from the person themselves, but I'm very hesitant because I don't want to bring this up before it's time. And I'm hesitant, and I ask a family member, is it okay if I ask this person how to die? Because it's a pretty abrupt or direct thing to say, and people aren't expecting it. But when I get permission, and only if and when it feels right, I bring that up. So that's my first big mistake. And then I have another big mistake that I did, and this was with my own dear brother. So I was with him, and he was unconscious, and he said two things to me. And the first one was when I walked in the room, and he said my name, Sharon, and then he went back under, and then, 4 or 5 days later, when he slipped and he was starting to breathe more shallowly and fewer breaths a moment in a minute, I said to him, you're about to make a journey. And he said, no, 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 no. And he just did not want to die. He didn't want to die because he loved his dear spouse so much, and he did not want to leave her side. And we had, after this time that day, we went out to lunch, and his son said, nope, he doesn't want to leave. He's not going to leave her side. He's going to do everything he can to stop this. And he went on for a week and a half, not dying, being in transition, just holding on until he couldn't do it anymore, and then he died. So that's about before one dies. Then afterward, I want to talk about a couple of things that have happened, or thoughts that occur to me. First, I want to bring back Linda, whose face was just beatific after she died. It was like she found the peace. She found not just peace, but she found heaven. Lots of times people look more at peace when they die. She looked incredible. One time I went and visited, and this person had just died, and it was the first time I went there. I didn't know the family at all. And I sat there and I said, there should be a song. And they said, well, we know 4-part harmony. We've been singing all of our lives. And so they sang this song of receive his soul and bring him to God Most High. And I swear, I felt the clouds part and this soul going right up into heaven. And I was alone with this family, and the nurse had gone to get some papers signed. And I thought, no one is here to witness this but me. And it was so incredible. And then the nurse came back with the papers, and everything was ordinary. And this thing happened. And of course, I will never forget it. Something that Kathy Nolan, a friend of mine, said to me after my father died was, your relationship with the one who you've lost changes in time. And I would add to that, it not just changes, but it becomes more loving. One time I was missing my father, and I just said, "Oh, you I don't know, you didn't really care about me or whatever." And I said, "I need some proof." And within an hour, I found in his own handwriting the directions for how to play his favorite card game, and we were a card game playing family. Found this in his own writing of how to play his favorite game, Schmear, and I said, "Okay, now I know you're with me." So, and another story is of someone who felt like her mother didn't love her as much as somebody else, and she was starting to wrestle with this after her mother died, and she was feeling this stuff and kind of thinking, oh, her mother loved her some, and then all of a sudden she was in the house and she was finding things that they had been looking for and they couldn't find it. She found this thing and that thing and that thing, but what she was really finding was her mother's love, and her mother was sending this to her, and she found it. So, what have I been saying to you all along? What is the stuff here? So, first of all, I want you to trust and honor what someone is doing. I don't want you to mess with it or change it. I want you to be a little piece of their process. And I want you to let they have their process, and you fit into it and help it to grow along without you putting in your own agenda. And they will hold on, and they will wrestle, and they will let go, and they will wonder, and they'll hold on again. But everybody does it their own way, and they're going to do it their own way. And that's them, and this is what they need to do. And the other thing I want to say to you is just connect. Just connect, you with them, because we are all one great thread that is woven into one great tapestry with the oneness, and we are all part of it. And that something is going on greater than you realize. And I encourage you just to be yourself. Humbly be yourself with all your foibles and all of your good things, because that's enough, and that's what's really needed. And when you are helping others become more themselves all the way up till they die, you are becoming more yourself. And that's the way it is. So, thank you for listening. And I want you to forget everything that's been said and trust what's come up from you, and listen to what's gone inside of you and pay attention to that. Thank you.